They say the hardest targets aren't the ones you can see. They're the ones hiding behind the people you trust, the ones who smile at you across the briefing table, who sign your orders, who shake your hand before you board the helicopter that might be your last ride. I learned that truth the night everything I believed about my service, my mission, my purpose, came crashing down in a village that shouldn't have existed on any map. My name is Lieutenant Sarah Chen, and I was part of Shadow Unit 7, a designation that officially didn't exist in any military database. We were the operators they called when diplomatic solutions had exhausted themselves, and conventional forces would create too many questions. Our missions were surgical, precise, deniable. We took pride in that efficiency, in being the invisible hand that kept threats from ever reaching American soil. For 3 years, I'd executed 17 operations across 4 continents, each one briefed as critical to national security, each target verified through intelligence channels. I had no reason to question. I was good at my job, exceptional even. My accuracy rate was 98%. My situational awareness legendary among my peers. I'd never hesitated, never second-guessed the orders that came down through secure channels in the dead of night. Until Operation Ember Crown. The briefing came on a Tuesday, unseasonably cold for North Carolina in September. Our unit had just rotated back from 6 weeks in Southeast Asia, a mission that had gone textbook perfect. We were expecting downtime, maybe some training rotations with Allied forces. Instead, we got recalled to the secure facility outside Fort Bragg where our actual operations were planned, the ones that would never appear in any official record. Colonel Marcus Vaughn ran the briefing personally, which should have been my first warning sign. Vaughn was old-school special operations, a veteran of conflicts that most people had forgotten, with a chest full of medals he'd never worn outside classified ceremonies. He commanded respect through competence rather than rank, and his presence meant the stakes were higher than usual. The target was a compound in the Zagros Mountains of northern Iraq. According to intelligence, it housed a cell planning coordinated attacks on American diplomatic facilities across the Middle East. The leader was a man named Khalid Rahman, described as a radicalized engineer with access to chemical weapons materials. Our mission was straightforward: infiltrate during a scheduled meeting of the cell's leadership, eliminate the threats, extract any intelligence materials, and disappear before local authorities could respond. Standard parameters: clean, surgical, justified. Except nothing about Operation Ember Crown would prove standard. Looking back now, I can see the signs I missed during that briefing. The way Vaughn's eyes wouldn't quite meet ours when he described the target. The unusual absence of our intelligence liaison officer, who normally presented target packages. The compressed timeline that didn't allow for the standard 48 hours of mission planning we usually required. Everything was rushed, pushed forward with an urgency that felt manufactured rather than operationally necessary. But we were trained not to question. We were the tip of the spear, the final instrument of policy decisions made far above our pay grade. Our job was execution, not evaluation. That mindset, that willingness to trust the chain of command absolutely, is what makes special operations units effective. It's also what makes them vulnerable to exploitation by those who understand how to weaponize that trust. We deployed under cover of a humanitarian supply run, our team embedded within a legitimate aid convoy that would get us close to the target region without raising suspicions. 6 operators total. Myself, Staff Sergeant James Parker, our demolitions and tech specialist, Sergeant First Class Maria Gonzalez, our communications expert, Corporal Devin Wright, our medic, and 2 newer team members, Lieutenants Alex Kim and Nathan Cross, both on their 3rd operation with the unit. The insertion went flawlessly. We separated from the convoy at a predetermined checkpoint, transitioning to local vehicles that would blend with regional traffic. Our approach to the target compound utilized a dry riverbed that intelligence had identified as having minimal surveillance coverage. By 2200 hours, we were in position on the ridgeline overlooking the compound, conducting final reconnaissance before engagement. That's when I noticed the first inconsistency. Through my night vision optics, I observed the compound's layout. A cluster of stone buildings arranged around a central courtyard, exactly as the intelligence package had described. But the activity patterns were wrong. Instead of armed guards maintaining perimeter security, I saw women moving between buildings, carrying what appeared to be supplies. Children's toys were scattered in the courtyard, a soccer ball, a bicycle, items that made no sense in a terrorist planning facility. I signaled Parker to move up beside me. "You seeing what I'm seeing?" He adjusted his optics, studying the compound for a long moment before responding. "Families, that's a residential compound, not a tactical facility." Gonzalez joined our position, her expression troubled as she surveyed the scene below. "Intel said this was a planning cell. Those look like civilians. We had protocols for this situation. If target identification was uncertain, we were supposed to abort and request clarification from command." But even as I reached for my secure communication device, something made me pause. A memory of Vaughn's briefing, the unusual emphasis he'd placed on time sensitivity, the way he'd stressed that this window of opportunity wouldn't repeat itself. "Shadow 7, actual to command." I transmitted on our encrypted channel, visual confirmation of target location, but observed activity patterns inconsistent with briefing parameters. "Request updated intelligence." Before proceeding, the response came back within 90 seconds, far faster than normal. "Command to Shadow 7 actual. Intelligence is verified. Target is utilizing civilian cover as operational security. Proceed as briefed." Standard doctrine would have been to accept that clarification and execute the mission. These weren't conventional battlefields we operated in. Adversaries regularly used civilian populations as shields, hiding their activities among innocent people to complicate military responses. It was a tactic we'd encountered before, one that made our precision capabilities even more critical. But something felt fundamentally wrong about this situation. I'd learned to trust those instincts over years of operations, where the difference between success and catastrophe often came down to recognizing details that didn't align with expectations. "Parker, can you access the compound's communication networks?" I asked quietly. He unpacked his specialized equipment, deploying the antenna array that would let him intercept local signals. "Give me 10 minutes." While he worked, I continued surveillance, documenting everything I observed. The compound held approximately 15 individuals, primarily women and children, with 3 adult males visible. None showed signs of military training or tactical awareness. Their movements were casual, domestic, completely inconsistent with people involved in planning terrorist operations. Through my scope, I watched a young girl, maybe 7 years old, playing with a doll on the compound's front steps. An older woman, probably her grandmother, sat beside her, sewing something by lamplight. In the courtyard, 2 boys kicked that soccer ball back and forth, their laughter carrying faintly across the distance. These weren't the sounds of a terrorist cell. These were the sounds of a family living their evening routine, completely unaware that 6 highly trained operators were positioned on the ridge above them, seconds away from turning their home into a kill zone. "Thought something," Parker murmured, adjusting his equipment. "Their communications are standard civilian frequencies. Cell phones, internet usage, nothing encrypted or secured. They're streaming a soccer match, for God's sake. This isn't operational security. These are just regular people." Kim had moved to an alternate observation position, providing overlapping coverage of the compound. His voice came through our team channel, carrying an edge of concern. "I've got positive identification on one of the adult males, cross-referencing facial recognition databases." We waited as his system processed the comparison. When the results came through, they confirmed my growing suspicion that something was catastrophically wrong with this mission. Target identified as Ahmad Rahman, professor of civil engineering at Baghdad University. No terrorist affiliations, no intelligence flags. He's got 3 published papers on water sanitation systems and zero connection to any extremist organizations. The silence that followed was heavy with implication. We were positioned to assault a compound full of civilians based on intelligence that was either fundamentally flawed or deliberately falsified. If you're getting value from this story, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe. This is the kind of real, raw military storytelling you won't find anywhere else. Now back to Sarah's impossible choice. I made the hardest decision of my military career in that moment. Shadow 7 actual to all elements. Mission abort. Return to extraction point Alpha, ma'am. Cross's voice carried surprise and confusion. Command authorized proceed. I'm authorizing abort, I replied firmly. Intelligence doesn't match observed reality. We're not engaging civilian targets on questionable data. Parker and Gonzalez began packing equipment immediately, their trust in my judgment absolute. Kim and Wright fell back to cover our withdrawal, but Cross remained in position, and when I turned to confirm his movement, I found him aiming his weapon not at the compound but at me. I can't let you abort this mission, Lieutenant, he said quietly, his voice carrying a tone I'd never heard before, cold, professional, utterly devoid of the camaraderie we'd shared. Orders came from higher than Vaughn. This operation proceeds regardless of your concerns. The betrayal hit like a physical blow. Cross wasn't just another operator. He was a plant, someone embedded within our unit specifically to ensure this mission executed. Even if leadership had doubts, Parker had his sidearm out instantly, covering Cross from an angle the younger operator couldn't match. Lower your weapon, Lieutenant, that's an order. But Cross had already keyed his own communication device, transmitting on a frequency none of us recognized. Packages compromised. Authorization to execute contingency, Omega. What happened next unfolded with the terrible efficiency of a well-planned operation going exactly as designed. Attack helicopters appeared over the ridgeline, their thermal imaging systems locking onto our positions. These weren't American aircraft. I realized with growing horror they were contracted military hardware, the kind used for operations that needed complete deniability. Move, I shouted. Even as the first rockets impacted the ridge above our position, we scattered, utilizing the terrain for cover as the hillside erupted around us. The helicopters weren't trying to capture us, I realized. They were trying to eliminate witnesses. Cross had already disappeared, extracted by fast rope from one of the aircraft, before it pivoted to engage our remaining team members. Through the chaos of explosions and suppressing fire, I saw movement at the civilian compound below. The families were evacuating, rushing toward vehicles with the practiced efficiency of people who'd rehearsed this exact scenario. Within minutes, the compound was abandoned, and I understood with sickening clarity what had actually been planned. This had never been about eliminating terrorists. It was about creating a terrorist incident. We were supposed to assault that compound, kill those civilians, and provide the justification for some larger military operation that powerful people wanted authorized. Our unit's reputation for precision would have made the intelligence appear unquestionable. The civilian casualties would have been blamed on the targets using human shields. And when questions eventually arose about the legitimacy of the intelligence, we would have been conveniently eliminated during extraction, blamed for a tactical error that resulted in our own deaths. The elegance of the plan was terrifying in its simplicity. Use trusted operators to commit an atrocity, then eliminate those operators before they could question what they'd been ordered to do. Frame the aftermath as collateral damage in a legitimate counter-terrorism operation. Use the public outrage over civilian casualties to justify expanded military intervention in the region, and bury the truth so deep that no one would ever know the entire operation had been manufactured from the beginning. Gonzalez reached my position, blood streaming from a shrapnel wound on her shoulder. We've got to move. They're going to level this entire area. Wright and Kim, I demanded, scanning for our teammates through the dust and smoke. Kim's down. Parker reported grimly, arriving with Wright, who was carrying our fallen teammate in a fireman's carry. Took shrapnel to the chest. He's gone. The grief threatened to overwhelm me, but I forced it down. I could mourn later if we survived. Right now, my remaining team needed leadership. Rally point Bravo, I ordered. We move fast and quiet. They think we're scattered and vulnerable. We're going to prove them wrong. What followed was 12 hours of the most intense evasion tactics any of us had ever executed. We moved through terrain that should have been impossible to traverse, using every technique we'd learned about avoiding air surveillance and ground pursuit. The helicopters maintained patrol patterns throughout the night, occasionally firing at shadows, trying to flush us from concealment. But we were Shadow Unit 7. We'd been trained to be invisible, to move through hostile territory without leaving traces. And now those capabilities were being used not against foreign adversaries, but to survive betrayal from our own command structure. By dawn, we'd reached a safe house maintained by an intelligence contact Parker knew from previous operations. Someone outside the official chain of command. It was a calculated risk, but we had no other options. Every secure communication channel we had access to was potentially compromised. Once we were secure, I made contact with the one person I thought might help us. A former commander named General Catherine Reynolds, who'd left active duty 3 years earlier under circumstances that had always seemed suspicious. She'd been mentor to many special operations officers, including me, before her sudden retirement. The call was brief, conducted through multiple encryption layers that Parker established to prevent tracing. "Sarah?" Reynolds' voice carried no surprise, as if she'd been expecting this call. "Let me guess. Operation Ember Crown went sideways. How did you know?" "Because I saw this same pattern 5 years ago. Different unit, different target, same ultimate objective. They're using special operations teams to create justifications for policy objectives. The targets are fake, the intelligence is manufactured, and the operators are eliminated to prevent questions." The confirmation of what I'd suspected still hit hard. "Who's running this?" "That's the trillion-dollar question," Reynolds replied grimly. "It's not one person or organization. It's a network of influence that crosses agencies and even nations. They've been doing this for decades, using special operations as their invisible hand." "We have proof," I said firmly. "Recorded communications, documented intelligence that doesn't match reality, crosses betrayal. We can expose this." Reynolds was quiet for a long moment. "Sarah, listen carefully. The moment you surface with that evidence, you become the highest priority target in their network. They have resources you can't imagine. But I know some people, journalists, congressional investigators, international oversight committees. We can get your evidence to all of them simultaneously. Make it too widespread to suppress." Over the next 3 days, Reynolds walked us through the process of building an airtight case. It wasn't enough to show that this one operation had been compromised. We needed to demonstrate a pattern, a systematic abuse of special operations capabilities that spanned years and multiple units. Reynolds provided access to her own documentation, evidence she'd been quietly gathering since her forced retirement, combined with our recordings and the intelligence discrepancies we documented. The picture that emerged was damning beyond anything I'd imagined. Shadow Unit 7 wasn't an isolated case. There were at least 4 other special operations teams that had been used in similar ways over the past decade. Fake intelligence, leading to operations against targets that served political rather than security objectives. Operators who asked too many questions, meeting with convenient training accidents, or being rotated out under suspicious circumstances. An entire infrastructure dedicated to using America's most elite warriors as expendable tools for interests that had nothing to do with national defense. It took us 72 hours to compile everything. Parker recovered data from our equipment that documented the entire operation. Gonzalez had recorded Cross's betrayal and the subsequent attack. Wright's medical logs showed injuries consistent with being targeted by American Allied forces rather than enemy combatants. Together, it painted an undeniable picture of systematic abuse of special operations capabilities. We uploaded the evidence to Reynolds' secure network at 0300 on a Saturday morning. By noon, it had propagated across multiple oversight organizations simultaneously: congressional committees, international human rights groups, military investigative bodies, independent journalists. Everyone received the same comprehensive package at the same time. The response was immediate and explosive. By evening, 3 Pentagon officials had resigned. By the following morning, the FBI had initiated investigations into multiple defense contractors. Within a week, the entire framework of unaccountable special operations was being dismantled under unprecedented scrutiny. Colonel Vaughn was arrested, trying to flee the country. Cross was found dead in an apparent suicide that nobody actually believed was self-inflicted. The network we'd exposed reached further than even Reynolds had suspected, connecting defense contractors, intelligence officials, and foreign interests in a web of manipulation that had operated for over 20 years. My team, what remained of it, spent 6 months in protective custody while investigations proceeded. We testified before closed congressional hearings, provided evidence to international tribunals, and watched as the machine we'd unknowingly served was systematically dismantled. Kim was posthumously awarded recognition for his service, though the actual citation remained classified. The truth about how he died, betrayed by the system he'd sworn to serve, became part of the sealed record that exposed systematic abuse of special operations. I received a general discharge, neither honorable nor dishonorable, a bureaucratic compromise that let me return to civilian life without the benefits I'd earned, but also without criminal charges for disobeying orders. Parker, Gonzalez, and Wright received similar treatment. We'd done the right thing, but institutions protect themselves before they protect individuals. 6 months after Operation Ember Crown, I stood at Kim's grave in Arlington National Cemetery. His family knew only that he died in service to his country during a classified operation. They didn't know he'd been murdered by people who saw soldiers as expendable tools rather than human beings deserving of truth. Parker joined me at the grave, both of us in civilian clothes that still felt foreign after years of uniforms. "You ever regret it?" he asked quietly. Blowing the whistle, we lost everything. Careers, benefits, the only life we knew. I thought about that question seriously before answering. I regret that it was necessary. I regret that Kim died before we understood what we were really part of. But the choice itself, no, we swore an oath to defend the Constitution, not to be weapons for people who operate above accountability. Think it made a difference? I know it did. Those civilians in that compound are alive because we refused to follow orders. Every operator who serves from this point forward will do so under oversight that didn't exist before. That's worth everything we lost. We stood in silence for a long moment, honoring our fallen teammate and the ideals that had cost us so much to defend. Here's what I learned in those mountains of Iraq. True courage isn't following orders without question. It's having the strength to disobey when those orders violate the principles you swore to uphold. They train you to be a weapon, precise and efficient and unquestioning, but they forget that the best weapons have a safety mechanism, a way to prevent catastrophic misuse. Your conscience is that safety, your ability to recognize when something fundamentally wrong is being disguised as duty, and your willingness to sacrifice everything, career, benefits, reputation, to prevent innocent people from being used as pawns in someone else's game. The hardest targets aren't the ones you can see across a scope. They're the moments when you have to aim that precision at the system itself, to eliminate the threat that exists behind the ranks and regulations and classified authorities. To be the operator who says no when everyone else is saying yes, sir. That's the mission they don't train you for, the one where victory costs everything, And the only reward is knowing you stayed true to the oath you took. If this story moved you, honor it by hitting subscribe. Share it with someone who needs to hear that doing the right thing matters more than doing the easy thing. Drop a comment below telling me about a time you had to choose between what was easy and what was right. And remember Sarah's choice the next time you face your own impossible decision. Because in the end, we're all operators in our own lives. The question is whether we'll follow orders blindly or have the courage to question when those orders betray everything we're supposed to stand for. That's the last directive that matters, the one that comes from inside yourself.